Welcome to Bowness-on-Windermere, one of the most popular spots in England's beloved Lake District, where thousands of visitors from around the country flock throughout the year. Bowness is especially popular among Lake District tourists on account of its position right on the shores of the largest lake in England, Windermere. Many boat trips across and around Windermere depart from right here in Bowness, and we'll take a look across the spectacular waters of the Great Lake a little later on. But let's first take a look at a map to see exactly where in the Lake District this popular town is located. As you can see, Bowness is situated right in the heart of the Lake District, in the area popularly known as the South Lakes, and not far from England's tallest mountain, Scafell Pike. Now, the Lake District is renowned for its many stunning natural landmarks, but the towns and villages dotted throughout the region are also full of history and things to see, Bowness here being no exception. Just off the town's busy main street, here we find the oldest building in Bowness, St Martin's Church, which was built 529 years ago in the year 1483. Despite being so old, and in fact one of the oldest churches in the entire Lake District, St Martin's here is actually the second church to have stood on this spot in Bowness, with the first built all the way back in 1203, and some elements of that original medieval church do remain in the building that exists today, parts of St Martin's east window thought to date from the year 1260. All of this history tells us that there has been a settlement here for quite some time, and long before Bowness became the tourist hotspot that it is today. In fact, way before the historic church here was even built, this was simply a small fishing village on the shores of Windermere that went by the singular name Bowness. And while almost all tourists pass down the main road where we started our walk, many often miss the centre of Old Bowness, a strikingly calm oasis nestled just a couple of lanes behind St Martin's Church. Making our way around the back of the historic town centre church, we'll exit St Martin's churchyard by way of a helpfully positioned gate that brings us out into the quaint centre of Old Bowness, which we'll explore before making our way down to the lakeside. Now, the medieval village of Bowness existed primarily around the church after it was built, with little more than a handful of houses inhabited by local traders who generally tended to keep to themselves. A humble rural settlement, medieval Bowness was a village mostly sustained by fishing on Windermere, as well as cattle and sheep farming, and it remained this way all the way until the 17th century, when a market was established for the first time in the churchyard of St Martin's. The founding of Bowness's market saw the village begin to deal with outside settlements more extensively, and in the following decades and centuries, this once isolated village began to develop a strong industrial profile, in particular in slate quarrying, extracting the material from which many of the local houses are distinctively built. But all this development came long before the tourist trade, and so there was just one pub in Bowness which served locals and sporadic visitors, that being this, the Hall Inn Wall. Originally known as the New Hall Inn, this is the oldest pub in Bowness by quite some way, opened over 400 years ago in 1612. Though at first named after a new hall that had been built nearby, the Hall Inn Wall's current name has a rather interesting origin, coming from the fact that the landlord knocked through the pub's front wall so that he could serve drinks to people outside. This appears to have been done specifically for the local blacksmith, who worked just outside the pub, and clearly enjoyed a pint on the job, but the name has stuck ever since. But as we reach the top of New Hall Bank here, named after the same New Hall as the pub, and which brings us to the edge of Old Bowness, there are more interesting stories to be found in the town's oldest pub. For 10 years in the 19th century, another of the pub's landlords was one Thomas Longmire, the former wrestling champion of England. Longmire, born locally in 1823, became a keen wrestler playing with his friends in the area, and he later went on to win 147 belts in a glittering career. However, at the age of 29, having passed his prime as a champion wrestler, Thomas Longmire returned to his home here in the Lake District, and became the landlord of the Hall Inn Wall, although even during that time, he continued to fight and win a number of contests. He then retired at the age of 36 and spent more time on his Bowness pub. But as landlord, Thomas Longmire welcomed a rather famous visitor to the Hall in Wall in the form of one Charles Dickens, who was visiting the area in 1857 and came to the pub to meet Longmire and learn about the local style of wrestling. Dickens, who described Longmire as a quiet-looking giant, may even have used the champion wrestler turned local pub landlord as inspiration in his stories. But the famed writer wasn't the only literary figure to have visited Bowness. Over the years, Bowness was regularly visited by the poet William Wordsworth, born not all too far away in Cockermouth, as well as the beloved children's author Beatrix Potter, best known as the writer of The Tale of Peter Rabbit and many more wonderful stories. Beatrix Potter had a strong association with this part of the Lake District when she was writing some of her most famous tales, and is remembered in the modern town of Bowness-on-Windermere with a children's museum of her own, which we'll visit at the end of our walk in just over 10 minutes' time. We'll also talk more about Beatrix Potter later on, but let's now make our way down towards the biggest attraction of all in this town, Windermere. This takes us past the gorgeous Stag's Head Hotel and Pub, another striking building constructed from the slate which the Lake District is rich in, quarrying of the material having served as a key part of Bowness's industry and economy before the town became the popular tourist spot that it is today. As you'll no doubt know, the Lake District today is one of the biggest staycation spots in the UK, visited by people from all around the country. But that wasn't always the case, as the mountainous terrain of the region once made it very difficult to reach. That being said, the inaccessibility of the Lake District, coupled with stories of its natural beauty, meant that a number of intrepid tourists began visiting the region from the 18th century onwards, beginning the long development of the Lake District into the visitor hotspot that it is today. As I'm sure you can tell from the crowds around us, Lake District tourism is as strong today as it has ever been, with the height of the summer season, the time when we're here today, seeing the region's towns and villages packed to the rafters with thousands of visitors. Later on, we'll talk more about how this town in particular became so popular, but there's no doubt that the iconic lake beside which Bowness is positioned played a major role in that rise to stardom. Here, we now find ourselves beside the shores of Windermere itself, the largest lake in England by surface area, measuring 11 miles long and 1 mile wide at its biggest. Long and thin in shape, Windermere is one of many meres that you'll find around the Lake District, the word mere simply referring to a lake or large pond. This mere in particular is thought to have been named in honour of a Viking chief named Vinand, likely around the 11th century and the time when Viking settlers were especially prominent in this area, and as such, Windermere is generally considered to mean Vinand's Lake. Now, Windermere was created thousands of years ago as a glacier retreated across the landscape and cut this long, thin ribbon of water out of the earth, which today is absolutely full of life all through the year, covered with boats big and small crisscrossing between the shores of this major lake. As well as leisure boating, Windermere, owing to its calm waters and great length, has also been the host of many water sports events, most notably even having been the site of the world water speed record, set on the waters in front of us back in 1930, when Henry Seagrave hit a then unprecedented 98.76 miles per hour, although he was sadly killed in the process. Slightly slower boats, meanwhile, include Windermere's many tourist ferry services, which connect Bowness with other popular lakeside towns like Ambleside at the tip of the lake, although there's often quite a large queue to catch the ferry from this point. Even so, people have been traversing Windermere by ferry for over 500 years, lake crossings having originated as rudimentary rowboats, which later grew in size into the large tourist boats that we know today. A ferry trip across Windermere is a highlight for many holidaymakers, but here we're looking towards the Belsfield Hotel, from which many wealthy tourists overlooked the lake and its stunning scenery. Once upon a time the home of a baroness, the Belsfield has operated as a hotel since 1869, offering some of the Lake District's very best views from its windows. Now, the opening of the Belsfield in the second half of the 19th century came at a time when Lake District tourism was really beginning to explode into life, after a number of decades having been only accessible by more adventurous voyagers, who journeyed into this wild and little understood region of England. But as word spread of the Lake District's beauty, efforts were made to make the region more widely accessible, the biggest step of which came in 1847 when the railways arrived into the Lake District for the very first time. In truth, the main reason for the building of railways into the Lake District was not nascent tourism, but rather local industry, although trains began bringing ever larger crowds whose arrival transformed this region. A number of rural towns were created out of thin air to cater to visitors, while Bowness here moved almost completely away from its historic industries of fishing, agriculture and quarrying to take advantage of the booming tourist trade. Even today, the busy tourist town of Bowness-on-Windermere is easiest reached by train, the nearest station being Windermere Station, about 1.5 miles from the lake shore along this main road, and which is located in the often confused but fully separate town of Windermere. Trains have been rolling into Windermere from the major town of Kendal ever since the station was built in 1847, but at that time, the town of Windermere didn't even exist, emerging out of almost nothing as local businesses were established around the station and on the road down towards Bowness here. And what was once upon a time the village of Bowness soon became the Lake District's main tourist centre, even rebranding itself by changing its name. Now, the original name Bowness is of Old Norse origin, from the time when Vikings dominated this part of the country, the name meaning the headland where the bull grazes, highly descriptive of the local geography and the historic presence of cattle farming. But the on Windermere suffix was only added to Bowness's name in the late 19th century, acting as a marketing move by the town to signal its proximity to the lake that everyone had travelled to the Lake District to see up close. Bowness-on-Windermere, remember that's a separate place from the town of Windermere further away from the lake, today remains one of the most easily accessible places where you can gaze across the stunning waters of Windermere. And as we've mentioned, the town now acts as a major tourist spot, with businesses and facilities of all kinds to cater to the thousands of visitors who pass through every day. Here, a short distance away from the busy main road, we find ourselves on the southern edge of the tourist heart of Bowness, where you'll find a range of cafes, hotels and pubs, including the 200-year-old Royal Oak pub just ahead of us here. Now, beyond all those facilities which cater to tourists, Bowness is a primarily residential town, with the vast majorities of buildings on the streets and lanes surrounding the main road home to houses in which locals live and many holidaymakers also sojourn. Officially, therefore, Bowness-on-Windermere has a population of just under 4,000, but that number swells every day on account of the town's many visitors, especially during the height of the summer season, when the town is almost overwhelmed by tourists strolling along its streets. Because of this, Bowness certainly isn't the quietest place that you'll visit in the Lake District. In fact, far from it, with the volume of people and cars making the town a little less idyllic than you'd perhaps like, and equally causing wider concerns for the town in its current shape. The impact of so-called over-tourism on Bowness can be clearly seen today, with the town's main road regularly jammed up with traffic, and the narrow pavements on steep slopes struggling to cope. Almost every inch of the town centre being used by someone at some point when it's at its busiest. That being said, however, with hundreds of holiday homes, pubs, restaurants and more all over town, Bowness is still very reliant on tourists, as are many of its neighbouring Lake District towns. As well as exploring the famous Lake of Windermere, many tourists also journey to historic and rural villages dotted around the Lake District, in amongst the region's wild scenery and its many fells. Fells are the name for the mountains found in the Lake District and this wider part of the British Isles, and the tallest fell that you'll find here is Scafell Pike, around 15 miles away from Bowness, and which stands as England's highest mountain, and a hugely popular hiking spot, both for leisure tourists and for those taking on the iconic British Three Peaks Challenge, where climbers tackle Scafell Pike Snowdon in Wales, and Ben Nevis in Scotland, all within a gruelling but exhilarating 24-hour period. All that walking is certainly worth it, with the scenery from the top of Scafell Pike second to none. But back down on the ground here, we're walking along the narrow Ash Street, lined with shops housed in early 19th century buildings, which have been the site of some truly enthralling historical events over the years. Well, maybe not, but there's certainly no shortage of history elsewhere in Bowness-on-Windermere. And these eye-catching buildings too are part of the town's impressive rise to prominence as a major tourist destination, with quaint shops built not to serve those who had been living in this region for centuries, but rather people who were setting foot into the Lake District for the very first time. And one of those people who fell in love with the Lake District in the 19th century was none other than the London-born author Beatrix Potter. We mentioned the World of Beatrix Potter attraction here in Bowness, which we'll visit in a couple of minutes at the end of our walk. But what exactly is the story of Beatrix Potter and the Lake District? Well, Potter first visited the Lake District in 1882, at the age of 16 on holiday with her family, the first of many trips to this part of England that soon became a home away from home. Over 20 years later, in 1905, Beatrix Potter moved to the Lake District to live, purchasing Hilltop Farm over on the other side of Windermere, which was paid for with royalties from her first few books, and which became an important artistic retreat for the author away from her home in London. The house and farm at Hilltop became a major inspiration to Potter, who embedded the local scenery into her many books, featuring in later editions of Peter Rabbit, as well as the tale of Jemima Puddleduck, another of the writer's beloved characters. For the rest of her life, Beatrix Potter continued writing tales which incorporated the scenery and wildlife of the Lake District until her death at the age of 77 in 1943, just a few miles away from here. She left Hilltop Farm across the lake to the National Trust, who have since maintained it as it was when Beatrix Potter lived there. But on this side of Windermere, in the town of Bowness, there's another attraction for those who want to explore more about Beatrix Potter. Just off the busy main road here is the World of Beatrix Potter, a popular family museum that brings Potter's characters to life, and which today ranks as one of the many things to enjoy here in Bowness. But sadly, as we approach the museum, we've now come to the end of our walk around the busy but enthralling lakeside hotspot of Bowness-on-Windermere. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're now looking forward to visiting this town for yourself in future too.